Hi, welcome back. Now the functions file which we have provided over here consists of somewhere around 50 plus functions, and we've tried to cover those functions which are used almost on a daily basis to manipulate data. Now what we have done, we've created some small videos wherein we look at some of these functions in detail so that you get more used to them and you can start using them in your work. Now the first function which we look at is if. Now, basically, if formula is used to check if a condition is true or not, and on the basis of that, it returns a value. Now, over here, we've provided the syntax for if function. So it is equal to, then we write the if function because we are calling it. Then we've got a parenthesis. Logical test is basically the condition which we want to check on the basis of which we want a particular value. So if the condition is true, then we will get value following the comma over here, and if the condition is false, then we'll get the second value. Now let's look at it how it works. So I've got an example over here. Now I've got four students, I've got their corresponding marks, and let's say I want to see if they've passed or failed over here. Now in the examples which we've provided over here in this particular Excel file, we have already used these formulas and then we've copied the syntax in the corresponding cells. But let's see how this works. So I'll remove this, and my passing marks are greater than equal to 40. So if the student scores more than 40, then he's passed, otherwise he's failed. So I'll use equal to. Now I'll call the if function. Now, as you can see that as you started writing, you got this automatic pop-up wherein Excel tells you all the different formulas which are starting with the if keyword. So because we want the if formula over here, now I've got if. I'll just click on my tab key and the parenthesis opens. Now the logical test over here is that the marks need to be greater than 40. So this particular cell consists of my marks greater than equal to 40. Now I'll put a comma because this is a syntax. Now because pass or fail is a text value, not a numeric value, so I'll have to use inverted commas, else fail. Now I'll close the parenthesis and I'll press enter. So now because this student had scored 90 marks, which is greater than 40, so that's why he has passed the exam. Now what you can do, you can either write the function for each of these cells manually, or you can also copy this function, select these cells and then just paste. So the formula automatically gets pasted and it will refer to these cells. So as you can see, it is referring to B23, B is this, and 23 is this. This one is referring to B24 and so on. Or you can do another thing. You go to the corner of this particular cell, and when you start seeing this black cross, just do a double click and the formula gets pasted automatically. So this is a function. I've got an exercise over here. So just go through it. And if you have any questions, then do let us know. Let's move on to logical AND. Now what AND function does is it basically returns a true or a false value. And it will return a true or a false value based on whether all the conditions which we have passed in the AND function, they are being met or not. So the syntax is equal to and then in the parentheses we are testing different conditions. Now in the if statement, if you remember, we were just checking one condition. In AND function we are checking multiple conditions, and if all of these conditions are met, then we'll get a true value. If even one of these conditions are not being met, then we'll get a false value. So let's look at this example over here. I've got the value in column 1 as 1, in 2 as 2, and I want to check if both of these values are greater than 0 or not. If they are greater than 0, then I will get a true value. If either of them is not greater than 0, then I will get a false value. Let's see how this works. So I will call equal to, and function is greater than 0, or I can even write it, B19 is greater than 0, parenthesis closed, enter. That's about it. Now I can paste the formula over here. So as you can see, because in the first row over here, both of these are greater than 0, so we are getting true. But over here, one of the values is not greater than 0, and that is why we are getting false. I've given an example over here where we are using and if function together. So go through it. And then we've got an exercise based on both using and if. And this will give you a very good idea of how these functions can be used together. Next, we'll move on to a very important functionality of if function, which is basically called nested ifs. So now if you recall, if statement just checks one condition, and on the basis of that, if the condition is true or false, it will return a value. In nested if, we can check multiple conditions, and on the basis of that, we can then have a value. The syntax over here is equal to if, then we are checking the logical condition over here. If the condition is true, then we'll get a particular value. But if the condition is false, now instead of specifying a value over here, we are again calling an if function, which will have its own logical test, and it will have again its own value if it's true or if it's false. Now, if we want to have more if functions involved over here, instead of passing a value over here, we can again call an if function. So this is again used quite a lot for data manipulation or when you are trying to create some variables. Now let's look at the example over here. Now what we've got over here is table A has the score threshold. So if a student scores more than 70, then they'll have grade A. If they score somewhere between 41 to 70, they'll get a grade B. And if it's less than 40, then they'll get a grade C. And I've got four students over here, 90, 70, 20, 41. So now I've got three grades, A, B, and C. If we just had two grades, then probably we would have just used if statement. But because we've got three grades, we'll have to use multiple ifs. So let's see how we are doing it over here. So my E26 over here is this particular cell, which is 90, which is the marks for the first student. So how this formula looks is we are calling if formula, then parenthesis open. I'm checking whether my score over here, 90, is less than 41. If it is less than 41, then we'll get C. But if it is not less than 41, then I'm calling another if function. Now what this if function again is doing is it is checking whether my score in cell E26 is less than 71. If it is less than 71, then it will give it a score B, else it will give it a score A. So this is how you can club multiple if statements together to check for multiple conditions. Now from Excel 2007 onwards, we can use 64 if conditions together. It does get a lot complicated as you keep on adding more if statements. But yeah, we can use 64 if conditions together, whereas Excel 2003, that just allowed us 7 conditions together. Now this is the last function which we'll cover in this video. In the next video, we'll discuss the text functions. Now OR function is again very similar to AND function. We are checking for multiple conditions over here, whether they are true or not, but it will return a true value even if one of the conditions is correct. So for AND, all of the conditions were supposed to be correct, and then only it would have given us a true value. But for OR, even if one of the conditions is being met, then it will return a true value. So for example, let's say I want to see if these values, if either of these values is greater than 0 or not. So let's see how this works. I'm calling my OR function, and I'm checking whether A20 is greater than 0 or B20 is greater than 0. True. And then I'll just copy them. Now, in the first instance, because both of these values are greater than 0, we are getting a true value. In the second instance, one of the values is greater than 0, whereas the second one is not. But because one of them is greater than 0, we are getting a value true. In the third instance, because both of the values are not greater than 0, we are getting a false. I've given an example over here where we are using OR and if function together. And then the exercise which is following this, again, that uses both OR and if. So do go through them. Thank you.